up, everybody? It's Uncommon NASA here with Short Fuse. This is the first ever Flashback Sessions. So that's what we're doing. Basically, me and Fuse have been talking for a while about doing like just like sort of a YouTube podcast type of deal on the channel, where I just kind of get into old stories of old sessions, back in the day stuff at either Ozone or Def Jux or even Post Jux. You know, I think it'll be something interesting for people. I will let you introduce yourself, Short Fuse.
Well, as he says, Short Fuse, this is pretty cool for me because I've known NASA for, let's see, it's 2004.
Yeah.
And you were still at Def Jux at that time, which is pretty cool. So for a long time after you left, a lot of people don't know, because you were trying to get, Uncommon its own foothold. You were, in the early days, you were trying to separate yourself more from Def Jux legacy, which is understandable because, you're trying to create your own lane. So a lot of the stories that we'll be getting into on this podcast, I've been trying to get him to tell for years, and so it's cool he's finally broken down and is doing it. So I guess the best way to do it is just to start from the beginning. And the story that we're going to open with is pretty wild because I've known you for, let's see, that's, what is it, 15, 16 years? And I actually didn't know this story until recently.
Yeah.
So just to give you guys a background, so there was this Company Flow single. Why can't I think of the name of it? End to End Burners.
Right.
I almost forgot the name of it. But there was a Company Flow single called End to End Burners. And in the CD version, there was an opportunity supposedly where you could send in your demos to Company Flow and they put them on this mixtape. So me being the type of person that I am, I didn't remember that. So I hit Twitter first, like, does anybody remember this? Was this a thing? Some people were like, yeah, it was a thing. And that was that Mandela effect. So then I hit up, I tweeted Mr. Len, and he was like, nah, there was just too many to go through, whatever. And then he said something really funny too. He said, we were too busy breaking up. We wouldn't have had time to go through all those demos.
Yes.
But so then I hit you up, like, do you remember this? And you were and you were like, yeah. So I'm thinking like you sent in a demo and then you took a total left turn on me and told me this crazy story. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the beginning of my involvement, my active involvement in the indie scene. Was that entire thing. And I don't remember if I ever talked to Elle about this at the time. And I think to take one step back and then come back forward. I mean, part of what you were saying about like for a long time, even just personally amongst friends, like I would be somewhat reluctant to talk about Jux era stuff because honestly, like, not you, but plenty of people would sweat me like way too hard for that part of my life. It'd be
Right.
Like, people would just immediately just want to talk Jux, and it was just kind of like, yo, wait a minute, I just, for some people, especially on the road, it was just like, yo, I just met you, like, I'm not trying to give you like, all this like all this historical breakdown and I'm here for myself right now.
Right.
And context wise, a lot of the reason why I was reluctant is like what you said, because I was trying to build my own thing and still am, obviously, with Uncommon. But by the time I left Jux, I was only 26. I mean, it's not like I was there into my 30s or some shit, like, because I started at 20 working with Elle. I started at Ozone, this story, at 19 years old. Right. And by the time I left, I was probably just turning 26, which is now some time ago to begin with. So at 26, a lot of people were just getting fucking started, and so I was, in my mind, I was just getting started. I just wanted to get going, with my own
Right.
music and my own label and everything. So obviously that's the mindset I was in. It was nothing personal. It's just where anyone would be, I think,
No,
in my
and I and
shoes.
I and I understand that because I've seen it with my own eyes. I remember we when we did a show in Milwaukee,
Hmm.
and this random dude walks up to you like, "Yo, are you NASA?" And you're like, "Yeah," and he was like, "Yo, so blah blah blah, fantastic damage, blah blah. Can you tell me
Yeah.
about this?" And we're like, "We're here to do a show, man." Like,
Yeah, it's like it becomes weird, man. Like over the years though, and I should say this, and this is part of why I like doing flashback sessions is interesting and important, is because over the years, I mean, a lot of this stuff is 20 years ago now, like the
right.
story that we'll talk about now is over 20 years ago, which is both inspiring and terrifying. But I think a lot of what I've said too in general is, we've got to like record and remember our own history, and kind of do what we can to kind of keep our own legacies where they need to be. And before I get really old and forgetful, I figured this would be enough distance from some of the stuff, and um enough like I'm still like in theory like in the prime of my life, so I could actually do the shit. And any stories that I tell, it's all about like putting positive stuff out there and giving like fans of the music from that time period. Again, it's not just Jux, it's not just Ozone. It's I was involved in a lot of shit that didn't even have to do with either of those entities. And a lot of people are just fans of that late 90s, early 2000s indie scene. And for those people, that's the kind of videos I want to make with you. And the reason that both of us are doing this together is because we're the people that really like remember like the importance of this stuff because we were there,
Right.
so but yeah, where did it all start? It was funny when you hit me up about that, because that's sort of like what spawned me to want to do something like this over time. Anyway, it wasn't an immediate idea, but yeah, so N Burners CD single comes out, right? I'm This is 97, probably maybe 98, maybe early 98. And I'm a year out of high school or so. I'm probably still in IR when this comes out, which is Institute of Audio Research. And that's where I went right after high school. I didn't go to college, I went to IR. And so I am, I get the 12-inch, and it's weird to remember this stuff because like this is obviously pre-internet, like long before pre-internet. This is
Right.
like social media is not even an idea, and the internet as a website searching engine is barely a thing. So somehow I find out that there are bonus songs on the CD version of the End to End Burners um, single that aren't on the vinyl, which is like the opposite of what was going on at the time. But like, so I went, I think I got them both from Fat Beats, and I got both. I got the vinyl single, which I still have, and the CD single, which I probably don't, to be honest. And I'm listening through, and Workers Needed comes on. And, this is before I think even Little Johnny was announced as a project. And Workers Needed is basically just a skit with a beat, on the end of the CD. And it's L and BMS. And by this time, I'm already like a huge fan of Indelibles and of Code Flow, and my senior year of high school was when most of that stuff dropped, and so I got into it live in the moment. And anyway, I had been working here and there at different demo studios. Like right once I got out of IR, like I started working at this demo studio, which is a whole nother adventure. Did that for about a year, and just really wanted to be in engineering and didn't ever think that I could really be engineering music that I loved or had a passion for, especially as a young person. And I had just started an internship at this other studio in Midtown where I was basically just making coffee, and it was fucking nonsense work. And I was really trying to get out, and I was like, let me take a chance. And I heard the single, and on the single there's this part where they want demos, you know. I don't even know why they wanted demos. I don't remember. Do you remember? Like, because you just heard it more recently than me, but what the fuck were they even doing?
Well,
Like,
so
are they gonna sign somebody? What the fuck was
so
happening?
that when I had asked Mr. Len about it, he said initially the idea was for them to find more talent and to put people on. But then
Like, God bless, man.
he said he said in the midst of it, obviously, they were, a pretty big name by that time already. And then I don't think they realized how big of a commitment that was going to be.
Yeah.
And then he said they got so many demos, they were just like, fuck it. So
I remember when I did get to Ozone, that was sort of like the time when they had given up on going through the demos. I mean, they were, through my time at Jux, like this is another episode in and of itself, is the demo pilot Jux, but like nobody ever went through those demos. Like they would come in like by the fucking shovelful, and especially at that time, Def Jux was even larger than what CoFlow probably was at the time in '98. But I could definitely see that those demos would not be gone through. It's just wasn't a thing. So that's why I'm kind of like baffled as to why they even did it. But luckily they did, because it changed sort of the direction of my career. Because what they did was they were like, yo, mail them to this address, mail them to Ozone Management and Studio, or whatever, however they called it at the time. And they gave the address out, and it was like 62 Pearl Street, blah, blah, blah. And I knew where that was because, on Staten Island, like, downtown Manhattan really well. I had already worked in downtown Manhattan, by that point. I'd worked in downtown for a couple years, even by the time I was 19 or 20 years old. And so I knew where it was, and I wrote it down, and somehow I put two and two together to like, I don't know if their phone number was on the CD, or if I then basically backtracked the address to the phone number. And I called and was like, yo, can I send a resume to intern there? And at that time, it was about like fax machines. Like that's how you sent your resume. There was no like email it to me. Everything was a fax machine. Like, so I literally put together my resume and like a cover letter. And, because of the CD, I had their address. So, I knew where they were. Like sometimes you could maybe dig up somebody's phone number, but you wouldn't know really where you were even sending it to,
right.
But I knew exactly what to do. I put their address. I made everything look neat because I had it on the thing. Like I didn't know at that time what I was doing is I had all these different 12 inches. I had Fondulum stuff and, a lot of other indie stuff that, one-off really recordings, and they weren't actually labels. This is all pre-Ruckus and, in terms of New York labels. And I would be going through these records and like I started looking for what studios they were recorded in, because I was like, well, fuck it. I don't want to work in this big ass studio. I'd rather work in like a small crib studio that's doing shit that I really want to do. And I would look at all the names of the studios, and they'd always be like, fucking Mr. Smith's house or some shit. You know what I mean? It would be like some made up name because the person didn't actually have a studio. They just had a basement, And
Right.
I had just come from, recording education where like, everything's recorded in a studio, of course, like nothing gets recorded at home, So it took me a while to figure out like, oh wow, like some of my favorite shit that gets played on Stretch and Bob, and this is obvious now, but like back then you had to tell me like, yo, some of the shit that gets played on Stretch and Bob and gets sold in Fat Beats is not professionally recorded. It was like a
which is mind
newsflash.
blowing at that time.
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
Because even when I first started professionally recording in like 2001, prior to that I was doing demos in like 98, 99, and those were done in professional studios. So, just to sidetrack a little bit, just to give people context, when 2006, so we recorded my old group Wastelands. We recorded our last album in a professional studio in 2005, and then in 2006, 2007, Danku got recording equipment for the house. And even at that time, I was like, yo, this is fucking weird. Like, we're in the living room.
Yeah.
This is not, nah, this is not how it is. So yeah, for those days, that's virtually unheard of almost.
It was overnight, man. Like it was, you know, you were on like smaller studios, project studios or demo studios really were popping up all over the city. And that, again, that's a whole nother show to nerd out on just recording history in New York. But you know, so I was looking at all these records and I couldn't find a studio. And then finally I noticed Ozone and I was like, wow, what's this? Like all this company flow stuff is recorded at Ozone. Like I want to be there. And then when that call for demos came out with the address, I was like, yo, I mean, I would have probably just went there and knocked on the door had I not gotten them on the phone, you know, because I had already done that, you know, for internships before this. And so I get my resume all pretty and, you know, it probably had like fucking Burger King and, you know, New York Stock Exchange runner on it. Like I had no experience. I mean, I did intern in high school at a recording studio, which is another fun thing that I did when I was really young. And so I had a little bit of experience here and there, but they brought me in. Like so they brought me in for an interview and the person looking, they happen to be looking for somebody. So the reason that I even, and this is an important thing, and I used to tell people this all the time, like just because somebody doesn't have a job listed doesn't mean that you shouldn't call them and ask. Things are a little bit different now because the internet and everything, but there was a period where like, if you wanted something, you had to go get it, you know, and that's what I did. You know, I didn't wait to see something. I just was like, yo, what are you guys doing? You guys need an intern? And like, it just so happened that like, you know, for a little bit of context about Ozone, like Ozone was run by four people. It was run by Amici, who, you know, was basically the manager of all the hip hop and poetry acts that were, and the producers that were all down with the Ozone management, which was Company Flow, Antipop Consortium, Mike Ladd at the time. I'm pretty sure that Amici is still L's manager to this day with Run the Jewels.
He is.
So, you know, obviously that was a long-standing relationship. They had, when I met them, they had probably only been working together for about 4 years, which in the music business is already a long time. But
yeah, especially for that kind of relationship.
Yes. And so that was Amici. There was Brett, who basically was also a music manager, an artist manager, but he managed really extreme pop acts. And actually told a little bit of the story of Brett on a Dope Shit podcast episode with Banana, where I got into like my experience with pop music and stuff like that, which was kind of interesting and funny. And then there was Mark, who handled all the web design. And at that time, that was like a new novel thing. You know, like in 1999, it was like if you were handling a web design, you were like a graphic artist, you were like a computer person, you knew all these things. Now everything is easy. But back then it was a different thing. And then there was Vassos, who, you know, was the engineer and basically the accountant of the business. And they had a space, 62 Pearl Street. If you know, anyone listening, if you guys are familiar with New York Telephone, there's a song at the end called Pearl Street, and that song's actually about my last day at Ozone when they were basically tearing the place apart and moving out. So it was a walk up right in downtown Manhattan. You know, eventually the building got sold and turned into lofts and condos and stuff. But at the time, they had a fully functioning recording studio. A couple of the guys lived there for a while. They basically slept in their offices until they all were able to kind of move out. And it was a pretty amazing time. I mean, those guys were probably about 26 or 27 at the time, maybe not even. You know, it was my understanding that they all met in college and then came back to New York to form this company. At least that was my point of view at the time. So the reason I got hired is because Vassos, the engineer, who, you know, if you know Company Flow stuff, you know that he mixed most of what's on Funk Crusher Plus, along with a guy named I know his last name was Cordero. I don't remember his first name, so apologies. But Cordero sort of taught Vassos and then moved on, was my impression. And then Vassos taught me because he wanted somebody else to do the engineering so that he could work on the accounting, because apparently the business was not doing that well. So they needed somebody to kind of manage it and really, get in there. And God only knows how they even survived. I mean, like, it's hard to look back, now, because like running a music business is so hard to generate money as your primary source of income that puts a roof over your head. And it was hard then. It wasn't the same as now. Like, I mean, the fun thing about doing stuff in studios and at labels in the 90s, the late 90s and the early 2000s is if somebody invited you to come check out like an after party at a label headquarters, you actually went to an office, and like there was like a physical place where this record label existed instead of like, Uncommon Records.
Right.
But but so Ozone was fledgling through. They had, like I said, they had a lot of different kinds of music being recorded. I got to record, jazz and folk and pop and experimental music. But I also got to record a ton of hip hop there, obviously. And that was what I wanted, and that's what I got. I'll briefly say and then hand it back, but like I can remember walking in for the interview. I don't remember the interview very much, but I just remember walking in and they had it's obviously gone now, but the main wall of the space when you walked in was a full graffiti piece by this legendary graffiti writer named Vulcan, who, if you are like me and you grew up reading spray can art, you know exactly who Vulcan is. And he did a piece. It was basically Ozone in big letters, and it filled up the whole wall. And I can remember sitting on a couch waiting for my interview to start and thinking like, hearing music and seeing like video games and all this shit and thinking like, wow, this is like fucking fame. Like this is like I'm in like a I felt like I was in a special place because I knew of the people who recorded there, and it was important to me. And I started working as an intern basically for free, obviously, and then I got paid a little bit and a little bit more, and by the time I was done, for a 19-year-old kid, I was probably getting like 200 or 250 a week in 1999, which was awful, but like, it was also like what you expected. I mean, I was so dedicated. Like music never entered my mind, I don't know if I said music, money never entered my mind when it came to music. So I love my time there, man. It really was only about a year, but when you're 19, a year feels like 4. So
Right.
It felt like I was there a lot longer. I mean, I was busy every day. Every day there was a session. I never went there for a day and didn't have anything to do. There were times where I would hang out there way after the session was over and play Dreamcast a lot. But
which is crazy because I don't I don't know that side of you because this current you is not into video games. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I when the Dreamcast stopped, that was about the end of it for me. But yeah, there were many raucous RAU raucous sessions of NFL 2K and Soul Calibur played in that place. But
Soul Calibur was my shit. So
it was, man, you just the trick is use Cervantes and throw people over the side, but that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I mean that was how I got in, and it was that simple of a story, and that changed everything.
Which is pretty wild because most people, so myself included, probably if I would have seen that at the time, I'd have been the one sending the demos in and just to have it sit in a shoebox somewhere probably. But it's funny that you bring up the Jux demos because we sent me and my old group, we sent something in like '03. We sent our first like official album at that time to Jux to see if anybody would listen to it. But knowing how it all works now, being involved in music, long enough, that shit probably just sat somewhere for a long time in
we
some box.
had we had a shelf at the office, because again, like, this is another episode in and of itself, but when Jux was at its peak, we had the studio, which was basically the basement of L's house, or apartment, and it was a fairly large space, but and then we had an actual office in Manhattan, that moved around a few times, but it was a physical place. I can't stress that enough. Like, record labels were physical places where people got up and used a Metro card or tokens to go and sit in a place and work on just running a record label. And I mean, that's a whole nother thing, because like for me, that was like an important time for me to see, because I understood what music could be instead of like what it was turned into, which was sort of like this thirst fest. But it was a great time, it was a great time to be young in New York, and to be involved in the music. And I was pretty humble at that time in my life. I'd like to think that I'm still fairly humble, but I was focused, and I really wanted to engineer. And I felt like if I engineered first, then I could get on and do my music. I guess I didn't feel like I was ready yet at that time. Again, like, I'm
Which
only
is
20, I'm only 20, 21, 22. Like, I'm young when I'm working at Ozone. I'm young when I'm working at Jux. So like but I was also present of my own limitations, and maybe I should have just pushed harder. I think about that every so often, like, because I mean, I could have. I feel like I probably could have gotten more stuff out on Def Jux if I was that kind of person. If I wanted to just push it to L. I mean, I was with them every day for years, for like
right.
5 years. I was with them basically 5 days a week. So I could have gotten anything out, I guess, like, I mean, we put the Woke single out, The Presence, and I've got some different productions, some beats here and there. But if I was that kind of dude, but I didn't want, I was trained to be an engineer before all this happened. Before I was at Ozone or Jux, like, my training as a recording engineer was really important to me. And when I interned at 17, and when I was learning from the OGs at IAR, like, it was very much told to you, like, don't sweat the musicians. Like, do not distract them when you're setting up their drum kit, when you're getting their mic levels, when you're recording. Don't give feedback, don't interrupt them, don't pal around. You're there for work. And to some degree, maybe I took that too seriously, but I mean, that was who I was. You ask any of those guys that I recorded, I never, you know what I mean? Like, they would have to ask me repeatedly if they wanted it, they would have to ask me repeatedly to get my opinion on a take or whatever. It just was not in my makeup as an engineer to this day. I mean, I've recorded you,
Yeah.
unless I'm actively, producing, if I have the producer hat on and the recording hat on, then maybe I'll say, oh no, maybe do the last part. Let me punch the last part in for you. Let me do this. Let me do that. But otherwise, I'm gonna let you do what you do. And then
Well,
we're gonna find, like, this is not just you, this is anybody. I mean, we're gonna find out how good it is when we mix it, right? Like,
right.
I mean,
Well,
time will tell. Like, but people got to produce themselves to some degree, and I've always had that approach, and that carried with me from Ozone and from Jux, and that's why, you know, my mentality was not to send a demo to get on. My mentality was to send a resume to get on, and that was just who I was then. And I mean, it's still a small part of me now, but that was certainly who I was when I was a young man.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, and it speaks. It's interesting that you had the wherewithal to know your limitations, potentially as an artist back then. Because you and I, knowing each other, we pretty much started musically around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2001, when I was doing my thing with my group, we put a, like a demo, like it was like a demo. At the time, we thought it was an album, but as you go back, you realize that's more of a demo album,
Mm-hmm.
because there's flashes there of what you're gonna do as an artist later. But we didn't, at the time, we didn't really know how to write songs, and we didn't really know how to structure certain things. It was just like, throw the beat on, we're gonna rap, 32 bars, and then okay, we're done. One of us is done rapping. Let's put a chorus here, and that's just what it was. Like there was no, there was no rhyme to reason what we were doing at that time, because we just wanted to rap, and we just wanted to be dope, and whatever. So it's cool that you had that um self-awareness to be like, this piece of me isn't quite where I want it to be just yet, so I'm going to focus on this and use this to get where I need to be, whether it was going to be with Def Jux, or obviously your own thing now.
Mm-hmm.
So and I didn't know that up until right now, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is still guided by that kind of principle. Like I am still of that mind. You know what I mean? Like I've gotten interviews and questions in interviews sometimes, like, oh, like, how do you're engineer, and you make beats and you rap, and blah blah blah, and like, how do you do, how is it doing all of those things? And my answer is always like, well, you have to do one of them at a time first, and like during this time period of my life, like I was an engineer first, and that was
Right.
my main thing. Then I worked on beats. Then I worked on getting my subject matter and my raps down. And like it kind of did. I mean, obviously there's this overlapping gray area in between those things, and there was a lot of simultaneous shit going on for me. But that is essentially how it happened, and I was a fan, when I showed up, I was a huge fan, and like I met almost everyone that I wanted to meet, like at Ozone. Like, and there were people that I didn't know of coming in because they weren't getting played on Stretch and Bob or whatever, and they went on to great things and were actually doing great things at the time. Like I didn't know anything about Sonic Sum. I didn't know anything about Anti-Pop Consortium or Mike Ladd or Saul Williams. Like when I walked in the door, and I walked out, like having met all those people, worked with all those people, and becoming big fans of all those people. And that was on top of, you know, Mr. Liff, who, was part of Ozone management at the time, who I had already had like his 12 inches, and obviously Company Flow. And other people recorded at that studio that weren't part of Ozone management, like Juggernauts. I think Yesh recorded a bunch of stuff there, but I if I remember right, we didn't work together at the time. I worked with Yesh many years later, but all those are the people on my radar, man. Like, I mean, I worked with Last Emperor at Ozone. I worked with um, Poor Righteous Teachers. Um, Recorded like damn near an album there. So like, I did a lot of shit at Ozone, and like when I walked in, like my training was like, when I would be at sessions, Vassos basically would just give me a tall bar stool, and he would be like, yo, just sit in the back of the room on this stool so you can hear the speakers over people. I would be in the back, and I'm 19, you know what I mean? So like at the time, it's funny because of like who I kind of became over time, but like I was the youngest person in the room for many, 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 many years. Like I spent, because I started so young. Like I started interning at 17. I started doing my own sessions at 18. And then I kind of like, to work at Ozone, I took a step back and just learned again. I didn't run the sessions like I did at the demo studio I was at. I just sat back. And I can remember just sitting up on this wooden bar stool, and people would be I don't know what their reaction was, because I'm in the back of the room and they're on couches and chairs and shit, and they're talking about the music or talking about bullshit or rolling up a blunt or whatever, and I'm just sitting there like on my perch, just like this, like watching like what Vassos is doing, and like looking at shit, and like just my eyes are probably like quarters, you know what I mean, like. And that was like my training, and the other thing that I remember, and I've probably told you this before, but like when I got there, I was like, huge like starstruck fan of Company Flow, because I was like 19 when I walked in the door, and I'm talking to Vassos about Company Flow. He's like, yeah, they're just like normal people, like totally down to earth, and I was like, cool, that's good, and like it was right when Just left, like I didn't meet Just myself until years later, like until they did a reunion show like in the 2000s and the early 2000s. It wasn't a reunion show, it was actually like their official breakup show or something. Like I met Just when he came to rehearsals, but I had not met Just during the Ozone period. I mean, in truth, it was probably only about 2 or 3 years later, but again, it feels like a long time. But yeah, so Just is already out of the picture, and of course no one would tell me why, you know what I mean, like not that I was like
Right.
crying, but like nobody would say, and I guess they just got into an argument, had musical disagreements. It was nothing that serious, but they were going different directions, is what I came to understand years later. But yeah, fucking so Len is still in the picture, and Len is still recording with L, and Little Johnny I had heard about it, and I guess I asked about it, and they had already finished it, and Vassos was like, yo, check it out, it's here in the computer, just listen to it, and like get yourself used to the room, get yourself used to the speakers, turn things up and down, do some test EQing. And I was like, word. And like, so I'm fucking, run up in the studio like all excited and shit, because I had not, it wasn't going to be out for like another 6 months or something. I don't even think they did the cover yet, like the shoot with the doll or anything yet. And I could just remember to this day, one of my fonder memories at that place was, when Worker and Uprise came on, my brain just exploded. I had no idea what I was listening to. It was fucking, to this day, it's my favorite song on that album. And I got to hear it, because I was in the right place at the right time. I got to hear it like way before anyone else even knew it was coming. And this is all at a time, unbeknownst to me, that like the relationship with Ruckus is sort of going on the rocks. And within a certain amount of time, Len would end up leaving Company Flow as well. But I knew Len, I mean, I was there for, the first session with those guys that I did was Patriotism. I was there for Linda Tripp. I was there for DPA. And Simian Drugs, everything on that single. I think that was all the Company Flow sessions that I was in, where Len and L were both present. But all that stuff, everything I just named, all happened at Ozone.
That's crazy. Especially the Linda Tripp thing. That song is wild, man.
That is a whole that's a whole episode can go to Linda Tripp. That was a fucking trip in and of itself. But yeah, that was a crazy session, and that was a crazy time. But yeah, I mean, that's I guess that's pretty much, if there's anything else you wanted to get into with just like my introduction to the whole thing with
No,
Ozone.
I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge now, because you've mentioned it before, that the first thing that you worked on with them was Patriotism. Was there like a vibe with that song particularly, or or were you around them enough at that time where you were just like, oh, this is just what they do now? Like, was it a different vibe from what you were feeling from them before?
Well, again, like I literally, and look, I've done the same thing. Like, when those guys show up to do Patriotism, they didn't know whether I was going to be there for 5 minutes or 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we had a connection or a vibe at the time, because
Right.
they didn't know who I was. You know what I mean? Len was probably more personable at first. I remember going to get lunch with him and us shooting the shit. But like, yeah, I mean, it was new. It was new to everybody, and I wasn't particularly surprised at like the quality of that song or the subject matter or anything like that. It didn't shock. It's kind of what I expected. Again, I was like a big fan, and I was a big fan of End to End Burners, which was, you know, kind of like their big hit and their most recent song with vocals on it. So, and if you listen to End to End and then Patriotism, there's not a huge jump. You know what I mean? Like they're both in the same vein.
Right.
And I will say that, like a lot of L stuff at the time, we recorded an entire version of Patriotism that is on a totally different beat. Um, you know, and then he basically took it home and must have immediately made a new beat because it was like we were back in the studio to mix the next morning, noon. We were back in the studio to mix what we had recorded the previous day
over the
and
original beat.
over the original beat. And the original beat was a baseline driven beat. It was like this offbeat bass, off kilter bass line. And I just remember it had like that, like every one or two, it had like this double clutch of like it was like, and it like would carry through. God only knows if that even exists anyway. If it does, it's probably on like a fucking 8-at or a DA88 that is might as well be like an alien object because nobody can play those anymore. But yeah. So anyway, the next day he came back first thing in the morning with the beat for Patriotism, the real beat, the beat that came out commercially, and obviously redropped the vocals because that beat was drastically different. It might have even been a different. It's not like he remixed it and redropped it. Like I think it was a different BPM and everything, and and then it went from there. Obviously, there were things added. I suppose probably the way that the cuts were done, or maybe the way the left-right stuff was done was probably done differently, or maybe only created after the new beat was there because that's what sparked that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty amazing session, but also remember, like part of the reason why, at least I think, from my memory, part of the reason why he thought about that as heavily as he did is because that was for Sound Bombing 2, I think.
Yeah, it was for Sound Bombing 2.
Sound Bombing 2 was mixed as it was a mixtape, technically. It was sold as an album, but it was kind of marketed and assembled like a mixtape, which was what people did in the 90s, which is kind of weird. I was never like crazy about that, but it worked for Sound Bombing, certainly. And I forgot who the DJ was. I think it was Babu, if I remember right. I don't remember who the DJ was. But the point of it is that L was concerned that what he was doing had to fit in a mix, and the original beat was like so off kilter that I think there was concern that it would be hard for like a DJ to blend it, in and out of another song that would have been contributed. So that's how Patriotism ended up sounding more the way it does. So yeah, I mean, that was good times. And it, man, I'll, like I said, I mean, look, this is Flashback Sessions. We'll get into a bunch of these stories. Basically on the Uncommon Records YouTube, first of all, if you made it through this video, you care about this kind of shit, please leave a comment and make some suggestions of stuff that we could talk about. I mean, you don't have to be an expert on my catalog. You just name something, and if I worked on it or if I know something about it, we'll talk about it. Sure, Fuze as well, has plenty of hip hop memories, particularly up in the Chicago and Midwest area and in indie scene in general. So, there's a lot to mine, a lot of good vibes and stuff to put out there, little tidbits. I mean, we're doing this, for the fans that really love that era of music. And, I think it's dope to have this stuff on record. Frankly, part of the inspiration, not all of it, is for doing this is, I veg out on YouTube and watch it when I should be working or whatever. And a lot of the videos that come up, are heads, talking about the old days. And, nobody's really talking about this time period. And this time period is fucking 20 years ago now. So somebody should start talking about it. So,
Yeah. And it's,
um,
it's one of the, it's arguable, for me and you personally, it's probably the most important time period, because without it,
mhm.
we wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
Because,
absolutely. 100%.
no major labels are coming knocking on our door. So
Shit. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, man. It was at that time, like it was just coming out of that era, like the indie movement happened out of necessity, not out of desire. In any case, I think that's pretty much it for Ozone. At least my introduction to Ozone, and getting there. So, again, like leave some comments below. Let's talk about some albums, some sessions. Let's talk about some songs, some shows, like whatever it is. We're gonna come up with ideas and have stuff to talk about. There's a lot to mine, but we wanted to get you started with just like, how did this even happen? How did this unlikely story begin that I would find myself working on, these great records at such a young age in such a rapid succession. I mean, it was a whirlwind. Now that I look back, it was a lot of shit that I did in a short amount of time. So
yeah, man, we'll definitely come back with some more stuff. I already got some ideas, but we don't want to bore people with the first one. So
nice, exactly. Keep it discreet. All right, y'all. Peace.
Peace.